So today's video is my August wrap up. So there's a few new people here, so I'm just going to explain for those people that I don't actually give star ratings. I find that they are too subjective. I don't necessarily even agree with myself from one week to the next, and it very much depends on my mood, etc. I talk a lot more about why I've come to this decision in a video where I talk about my ratings. I will link that in the description below, so feel free to go and have a look at that if you want to know a bit more information. I have been considering giving CAWPILE a try, which is a rating system that was created by I'm sorry, I don't actually know her full name, over at Book Roast. I will link her channel in the description below. Go and check her out. Because that seems like a lot more, will get me closer to what I would actually think of it. But I haven't quite got there yet because it's a little bit more involved than, well, what I'm doing, which is basically nothing. But I have been talking to you guys about what I thought of them and why, etc. So I'm going to do that in this video. I will tell you some stats, like how many pages I read and what categories of books I read at the end of the video. So let's start with the books that I read. This is not in any particular order, just going from one to the other. So the first book that I want to talk to you about is a book that I started at the very end of July, and that is The Devise by Libba Bray. I know this is a darling of booktube, very probably book.net, which is I think why I probably didn't like it as much as I could have done. I think it was a little bit overhyped for me. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really well written. I thought that the pacing and the way that she develops the storyline and the way that we get the snippets of information and the different points of view was really well done. I really liked the main action of the book. I thought that was really well done. Yeah, so I did really enjoy it. But like I said, I think that it was overhyped a little bit for me. So where if I hadn't known as much about it or been expecting to like it as much as I was expecting to like it, I probably would have liked it a lot more. But it wasn't as amazing as I was expecting it to be. Basically the best book I've read this year, if not ever, just because it's so hyped and so many people on BookTube love it so much. My parents read it recently, they read the whole series recently and they absolutely loved it. So yeah, I just think it was a little bit overhyped. So like I said, I really did enjoy it. I thought that there are several different points of view, and I really liked the way that she gave us those points of view and the way that the characters were developed. I like how we are very obviously reading what will be a series. So this is obviously the first book in a series, so there's lots of build up for the later series, but it still has a great story in and of itself. I really like the way she blended the sort of supernatural with the mystery thriller detective story. In some respects it's just a straightforward murder mystery detective story, but in other respects it's totally not at all, because it is there is a supernatural element. So I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the characterization, like I said, although now I've heard tell by a variety of different sources and not just booktubers that it is actually really well written from the point of view of historical accuracy. So the way that she characterizes the dialogue that she uses to characterize some of the characters is very accurate. I found that a little bit jarring. I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure if it's because it just seemed kind of unnecessary to me, although she's doing it to try and place them in the 20s, but I don't really know very much about 1920s America, so I guess that probably is why it felt strange to me, because it didn't feel like the way that anyone would speak, but then I don't know if it's accurate. I guess I mean, I read plenty of classics and other books where people speak in totally different ways to how we speak today, and it doesn't bother me, so it could just very well be that it's not a idiom that I'm particularly familiar with, which is why it was a bit jarring for me. It really only happened with the main character, Evie. Maybe it's just a speech pattern of Evie's that I didn't particularly like, and that's okay because I don't have to like every single thing about a particular character. In fact, it makes her much more human because we don't like every single thing about all of the people in our lives, even people we absolutely adore. Usually we'll have a trait or two that we find annoying, even if it's minorly annoying, and this was minorly annoying for me. Yeah, so that's one of the things. It sounds really silly to say that I didn't like this book as much as I thought I would, so therefore I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. Yeah, I did really enjoy it. I think it just suffered a little bit from overhyped for me. But I definitely would recommend. I'm definitely intending to read the rest of the series and looking forward to seeing where we go from there. So that's the first book I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk to you about is The Convenience Store Woman. Or actually, sorry, it's just Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about this one because, as you probably know, if you've been watching for a while, this is a book that my friend Michelle chose for me in our We Choose Each Other's TBR video. I will link that in the description below if you want to go and check that out. Yeah, so Michelle and I got together and I chose 4 books for her to read, and she chose 4 books for me to read. So this is one of those. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because we are intending to film a video together where we discuss what we thought of the books that the other person gave us to read. I will just say though, I did enjoy this book. It's very short, 160 something pages, really easy to read. It's a contemporary translated book, so it's very easy to read, and it's really interesting. It's an interesting snapshot into a life and into a person's personality, and into a way of thinking about and approaching the world that is so completely different from my own. So for that reason it was quite strange, but yeah, really well written and really interesting and engaging. So I will talk a bit more about that when Michelle and I meet up to discuss. So yeah, that's that one. So the next 2 books that I want to talk to you about are the second and third book in the Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare. So Clockwork Prince and A Clockwork Princess. I will put them both up here. I don't own them. I've read them on my e-reader, borrowed them from the library. If you've been around for a while, you would know that my friend Connor from Connor's Library Corner, I will link his channel in the description below, and I have been reading the Cassandra Clare books. So we have now finished the Infernal Devices series, which means we're going back to 4, 5 and 6 of the Mortal Instruments series, which I'm feeling a little bit trepidatious about, to be honest. I am not a huge fan, or I wasn't a huge fan of the Mortal Instruments series, but I preferred, what did we just read? The Infernal Devices series a lot. So I think there are a few reasons for that. So first of all, as I have said in previous videos, I don't think Cassandra Clare is the best writer I've ever come across. I don't hate her writing by any means, but I just don't think that she's that amazing. I think that she relies too heavily on some very overdone not tropes, yes, but not even tropes, like just ways of writing. So very immature writing, I thought. Now, obviously, the first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments are her first 3 books, so it's completely understandable that she would mature as a writer, and I think that's definitely clear in the Infernal Devices series. So one of the things that I found a bit difficult to read was just the sheer amount of description, which is strange coming from a person that actually really enjoys descriptive purpley prose. But I like, this is going to sound weird again, but I like purple descriptive prose when it is concise. So you don't need to consistently add on to a sentence about one thing. So you can describe a room by picking one focal point and being flowery about that one focal point, but then giving us that's enough. You don't need to then describe every single, let's say for example you walk into a room and the focal point that you want to talk about is the floor-to-ceiling bookcase with the really ornate ladder that slides along. Once you've described that bookcase, you don't then need to describe the ottoman in the corner and the whatever else, the dying flower or whatever it might be, unless they are significant to the plot. So what I found with Cassandra Clare, particularly in the first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments, was that she would do the one, she'd pick a focal point and she'd describe it and be very flowery about it, but then she'd also describe all of those other things in the room and spend a long time describing things that weren't really necessary to the plot, where you get the idea of the type of person that owns the room that you're in, or whatever it is, whatever the reason is that you are describing something. I feel like you can have really flowery writing and really beautiful descriptions of a thing or of a place or whatever, as long as it has a point to the plot. And I didn't feel that Cassandra Clare's overly flowery descriptions were necessarily important to the plot, and also oftentimes were about the same thing. So she would describe how a fire burning down a city looked like this thing, and then she'd describe how it looked like this other thing and give 2 very different similes to describe what it looked like. When we know what a fire looks like, we probably didn't need any kind of simile to understand what was going on. If we wanted to know that it was horrific, then we probably would get that. Maybe you could have one simile for horrific, but then if you wanted to know that, okay, this is a terrible thing that's happening, but at the same time it actually looks really beautiful, you really only need the one simile. So that was the thing that I was finding difficult, one of the main thing that I was finding difficult about reading Cassandra Clare. But she's definitely pared that down in the Infernal Devices books, and she's definitely started to do a lot more editing of her own work, or someone else's, I don't know, which means that it's a lot more readable. So like with any trope or way of writing that I talk about, when it's done well, I like it. So it's usually not necessarily a trope or a theme or a plot point or whatever, or moral or whatever, that I don't like specifically. It's usually when that is done badly, and if I pick out a particular trope especially that I say I don't like, it's usually because for the most part it's one of those tropes that are often used by not very good writers, so they're not very well written, shall we say. The point being that I didn't think that Cassandra Clare wrote either the forbidden lovers thing with Jace and Clary very well. I was very dubious of the obvious love triangle that we're supposed to see happening in the Infernal Devices series between Tessa, Jem and Will. So I don't really want to do spoilers again, although at this point I feel like I'm the only person that hadn't read any Cassandra Clare. So yeah, don't want to do spoilers, but I definitely felt that she did that better than I was expecting. I still wouldn't say that a love triangle is my favourite trope to read, but she definitely did better than I was expecting and wrote it better than I was expecting. I also quite liked those characters, whereas I didn't like Jace and Clary very much. Now again, I don't necessarily have to like characters in order to like the storyline or like the book, but in this particular instance, you're very much obviously supposed to like Jace and Clary, and yet from my point of view they didn't really have many redeeming features, other than apparently they were really good looking, which, whatever. However, I quite liked Tessa, I really liked Jem, and I didn't mind Will, so that definitely helped. So, yes, that was Clockwork Prince and a Clockwork Princess. Just going to pause for a minute while Rowan does whatever Rowan's going to do. Cup of tea? Noodles. So the next 2 books are 2 more books that Michelle gave me to read for August. So again, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here because, like I said, we're going to be discussing it together. These two books are my favourite books of the month, and the first one is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I'm putting it up on the screen because I actually lent it to my sister and my brother-in-law, so I don't have it at the moment. I loved this book. I thought that it was incredibly well written. It was heartbreaking. It was unfortunately very relatable because of what's been going on in the US at the moment. I mean, forever, but it's been definitely on people's minds and been happening a lot in the US at the moment. So for those of you that don't know, this is a book about this is not a spoiler because it happens in the first chapter, but a young black girl living in the States who, on the way home from a party, witnesses a good friend of hers being shot by the police, and it's for no reason. The police pulled them over. They claim that the guy is doing something illegal or not listening to the police, but he isn't. All he does is get out of the car and he tries to do the right thing, and they pull him over for no reason either. So the whole thing is completely a lie. And it was really, yeah, it hit me. I am becoming even more and more aware of my privilege by reading books like this. I saw a comment from, I think it was Celia. I will put her channel in the description below, and I'll put a little note somewhere here because I've actually completely forgotten what her channel name is. But anyway, she made a comment a while ago about if the only book that you have read to do with this issue is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, you need a better education. At the time I hadn't read the book. Now that I've read the book, I understand that she was not suggesting that the book is not poignant and does not have really important things to say about the movement and about the situation and about the experience of black people in the United States. However, I think her point was that if that's the only book that you have read, then you haven't done enough. You've only started the process. And that she made the point, and quite a few other black booktubers have made the point, that you need to look outside of fiction. And I absolutely take their point, absolutely agree. It is definitely important that we learn, not just from the standpoint of this is a fictional reality, so it's not real, so I can ignore it. But we need to read non-fiction so that we are aware of the history and the situation and more aware of how impactful it is. However, I've always been a person that finds fiction actually, for the most part, more impactful, because I feel like I get a story, I get a person's background, and so it impacts me more. And when I know something like The Hate You Give is based on real life events, it's not actually telling a specific memoir, but it's based on what actually happens, then that hits me really hard. And because I get into the character's head, it is actually, for me, a lot more impactful usually. Again, not that I'm going to stop here, not that I even started here. It was an interesting point that she made. It did make me start elsewhere outside of The Hate You Give, but yeah, it was incredibly impactful, and I think it's a really important book for people to read, for young adults to read, so that they have an understanding of the situation and the experience of black people in America. Yeah, so I don't want to go into any more detail because, like I said, Michelle and I will discuss, but those are some of my initial thoughts. I absolutely loved it. And the next book that I want to talk to you about is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owen. Again, this is a book that Michelle put on my TBR for me, so again, I don't want to go into any detail. I love this book as well. I recently discussed how much I liked it also in a different video, so I will link that in the description below. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought that Delia Owens has a beautiful way with words. She has a beautiful way of approaching place in a story. I recently watched a video by Leanne from Literary Diversions, and she talks about place as an extra character, and I think that this is definitely what Delia Owens has done in this book. I think that she has definitely written another character, and that is the swamps, the marsh, where the main character grows up. That is my favourite aspect of the book. I still did definitely like there's an overarching storyline, but it's not central to everyday occurrences in the book, but you keep coming back to it and is the frame of the narrative. And I enjoyed that, but it wasn't the point. And I definitely think that that is very clear, which probably for a lot of people would have made them less inclined to like it. Personally, it didn't bother me. I actually thought that that was a really interesting way of doing it, and it gave you purpose, but realistically it was just a story of a girl growing up in the marsh and the experiences that she had and her connection with the land and her connection with the other animals that use the land, that live on the land, and how she began to see those animals as brothers and sisters, and human resilience. And I just thought it was a beautiful, poignant, wonderful story. It's literary fiction, so the point of the story is not the plot. So if you are a plot-driven reader, you may not enjoy it as much as I did. It's definitely an exploration of place and our connection to place, rather than being, this is the thing that happens and this is what we do and this is how we respond and then we do the next thing. It's not that kind of plot-driven story. It's character-driven story, and the main character, I think, is the marsh. But I thought it was beautiful, and yeah, I really loved it. So like I said, when Michelle and I get together to discuss these books, then I will go into more detail. Yeah, so those are all the books that I read during August. So my stats are, overall, so as I just said, my favourite books were Where the Crawdads Sing and The Hate You Give. My least favourite books were Clockwork Prince and Princess. I read a total of 6 books. They were 2,637 pages all up, and there was a mixture of YA. I think I read 3 YA, and then the rest were adult. There was 2 urban fantasy, 1 literary, and 2 contemporary. Does that sound right? Yes. Yes. Anyway, so those are the stats. Like I said, I don't do star ratings, so I'm not going to talk about that. And yeah, that is my August wrap up. If you have any comments or questions about anything that I've said in this video, if you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. If you liked them, if you didn't like them, I'd love to know. If you want to have a chat with me on another social media platform, that information is in the description below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.